Well, good evening. It's a real joy to be here at Rockford University to have this forum, extraordinarily important forum, on the impact of the lessening of local news across America, including Rockford. You'll hear folks today that have been associated with newspapers, magazines, radio, television, and online. Uh, Different types of new online publications. It's a whole new world out there. And what we have found is the fact that people are really starving for information. A lot of this can go back to this book written by David Reisman in 1950 called The Lonely Crowd. And that's where he talked about the fact that even back then he saw a disintegrating of Americans coming together. And this was a time right after the war when that wasn't the case. And then other books, one is Bowling Alone, a classic document that talks about the fact that more and more people are becoming lonely and becoming disintegrated, are not disintegrated. Well, their association are disintegrated. And then Moise Nahum came out with a book called The End of Power, where he said we are witnessing around the world today the lessening of people wanting to join organizations, um, veterans organizations, churches, laying out the fact that Americans and others in the world just don't like getting together the way they did traditionally. That's led the CDC to say that loneliness now is a disease. So, in the midst of all of this, we said let's bring in people who are experts, who understand what's going on. And in your handout, Mark, please excuse me, but Mark Bonney is the Rockford Alderman for the 8th Ward. No, for the 14th Ward in Rockford. And first, we'll start with Professor Tim Franklin. Tim is a professor at Northwestern University Medill School of Journalism. That's the cat's meow on learning journalism. And Chris Linden is also a graduate of that particular school. Uh, the uh, the university has a program dealing with uh, local journalism, the loss of local journalism. What does that mean? And students that are actively studying it, and there's a website, and Tim can explain that, that's just loaded with examples of the impact of this issue across the country. Uh, Tim, let's start with you, and then each panelist could take maybe 8 to 10 minutes, or because we want to leave it open to questions, and then Eric is on his way from the Boone County opening day, and actually from ending his news broadcast. So let's start out with Tim Franklin.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you. Congressman Manzullo, thank you for that introduction. I want to thank Rockford University for hosting this event tonight. And mostly, I want to thank all of you for caring enough about this issue to come out this evening and to talk about it and to have an interactive conversation about what's happening. Now, I'm standing in the middle of a chapel, so I don't want to say that local news and democracy are going to hell. I do not want to say that. But I do want to say that we're at a critical moment for both, I think, and they're very interrelated, and we can talk about that. And there is time for redemption, so we can still fix this. And that's kind of what we want to talk about here tonight. So at Medill, I'm the Senior Associate Dean of the school, and I direct a program called the Medill Local News Initiative. It's a research and development project that does research about local journalism across the U.S. We also work directly with news organizations to develop new products and to try to help local news organizations find long-term sustainability. And as part of this, Medill is the home of the State of Local News Project. So we track local news across the U.S. on a county-by-county basis. And why do we do that? We do that so that we can see the trends that are happening with local news across the country so that we can help inform policymakers like the senator and like others, and so that we can let the industry and philanthropists and community leaders know what's happening with local news across the U.S. So I'm happy to talk more about that. I've given whole speeches on this topic. I won't bore you with that tonight. But what I do want to do is set the table for this conversation and provide a little bit of context about what's happening in local news in America, and it's quite serious. So we have this phrase called news deserts. And a news desert is a community where residents have very limited access to credible and comprehensive news and information that feeds democracy at the grassroots level. So we now have in the U.S., according to our data from last year's report, and we're updating that as we speak, there are 206 entire counties with no local news, none. There are now 1/5 of Americans, 70 million people, live in a county with either no local news or only one local news source that covers an entire county. 70 million Americans live either in a news desert or in a county that is at risk of becoming a news desert. That is a lot of folks. So since 2004, I'm going to lay a lot of numbers on you, and I'll try not to overwhelm you with data. Since 2004, there's been a loss of 2,500 newspapers in the U.S. since 2004. Since 2019, we've lost 360 newspapers across the U.S. And according to our report last year, we're losing on average 2 newspapers every week. Every week in America, 2 newspapers are dying or are closing up shop. And that in most of these areas, residents are not getting a replacement. They're not getting a digital-only site. They're not getting any kind of a print replacement. They're just vanishing. So why is this happening? It's happening because the business model for local news has basically imploded. It's being caused by technology and people pivoting from print to digital. It's also happening because basically 2 companies have locked up all of the new digital ad revenue in the U.S., Facebook or Meta and Google. About 70% of all digital advertising goes to 2 companies. It's a real duopoly. So let me tell you a little bit about the situation in Illinois. And I'm sure that you are following the local news in Rockford and in this area, you're probably interested in what's happening here. So the good news is Illinois has 342 newspapers. That's the 3rd highest of any state in the country. That's good, right? Of the state's 102 counties, 5 now are news deserts. So Illinois has 5 news desert counties, and 35 of Illinois' 102 counties only have 1 local news source. So this is a problem that is growing and is on the cusp of getting worse in the state of Illinois. Since 2005, Illinois has lost 231 newspapers, or 40%. I'll just repeat that. Since 2005, Illinois has lost 40% of all of its newspapers. That's the 9th highest loss of any state in the U.S. And the 5 news desert counties in Illinois are Alexander, Edwards, Hamilton, Perry, and Pulaski. And then just a few more stats. So since 2006, newspaper employment has dropped by 70%. In the same period, newspaper revenues have declined from $50 billion to $20 billion. Newspaper advertising revenue in the last decade has dropped by 80%. So this is a problem that is happening all over the country, and I know Rockford is affected as well. So just a couple of more notes. A third of all newspapers and 70% of all dailies are owned by just 25 companies. 70% of all dailies are owned by just 25 companies. There has been a slight uptick in digital-only news sites across the country, but about 90% of those digital-only news sites are in metro areas. So what's developing is a real kind of news haves and news have-nots kind of situation. Now, I've given you a lot of gloom and doom. I know. I don't want to depress you this evening. There is some reason for optimism. And I'm happy to talk more about this. We are seeing some legacy newspapers, especially in metro areas, that are innovating and that are pivoting from an advertising-based business model. About 80% of all income to newspapers came from advertising 10 years ago, and are pivoting to a reader revenue business model, or digital subscriptions, or print subscriptions, or memberships. So we are seeing that switch, and a lot of news organizations are now having success selling digital subscriptions and memberships to support the journalism that they're trying to do. We are seeing a modest growth in nonprofit news organizations across the country. That, I think, is a good thing. It's not a cure-all. It's not for every community, but we are seeing growth in that area. I think that's important. We are seeing some new business models start to emerge. I'm happy to talk more about that later, but some really creative and new models emerging. Just in Chicago in the last year, WBEZ, the public radio NPR affiliate, acquired the Chicago Sun-Times. They've now hired 60 plus journalists at their combined newsrooms just in the last year, and I think both are demonstrably better since that acquisition. And then we're going to talk more about that, and the senator is the chair of the Illinois Local Journalism Task Force, and I serve on that task force with the senator. But there's also a growing movement across the country for public policy solutions to this crisis. And there's a lot of activity happening in states right now. About 12 states in the U.S. either have passed legislation or are considering legislation to try to help local news organizations, which, really are a glue for a lot of communities. They're the news and information source that helps keep people informed, helps hold public officials accountable, helps you all know what your neighbors are up to, helps you know what events are coming to town, how your high school sports teams are doing. This work is really, really important. Now, people have asked me, okay, Franklin, business people, companies go out of business all the time. So what's the big deal about local newspapers going out of business? I don't want to say that it's a good thing when anybody loses their job, or in retail or any other profession, but there's now been research that shows that there are tangible effects of the loss of local news in communities. Civic participation declines. Studies show that turnout in local elections goes down. The number of candidates running for public office goes down in communities without local news. There's also research that shows that corruption increases in communities because there's no watchdog. There are no journalists kind of helping represent you in these meetings. There's also research that shows government spending goes up and that borrowing costs of government rise because Wall Street assumes that if there's no local news source, that there are no watchdogs, so they're going to charge more for borrowing costs for bonds. And the other thing, and again, happy to talk more about this, but is that misinformation and disinformation flourishes in communities with no local news. Where do people go if there's no local news? They'll go to Facebook groups in some cases. That's great. I love it that people are participating in Facebook groups and are being active. But, people on Facebook groups are not professionally trained journalists who are doing fact checking, doing research, doing interviews, talking to sources like Congressman Manzullo, and getting background. So it's just not the same type of information. This is a crisis, and it is a crisis that has pretty deep implications, I think, for our democracy. Misinformation, disinformation is running like a wildfire across the country. and it's an issue that I think we all should care about and I hope improve. So with that, I probably went over 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much, and happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is, I was going to say, needs no introduction. He talked to us for 25 years. I'm WTVO and he was the anchor man. And then he went ran for office and he won. I bet you were as surprised as I was when you won the election. And when I won in 92 at the primary, I turned to my wife and I said, "What do we do now?" And she said, "Well, there's a general election." I said, "Oh, okay." But Steve has been a strong voice in the community. As news anchor, he has a background in everything that's going on with TV. And then he's going to be followed by Mark Bonney. Mark is Steve's chief of staff. Mark worked for the Rockford newspaper for 20-something years, at a time when the Rockford paper had over 400 employees. It's now down to, I believe, 6. And that's because of the loss of revenue and various things. So, Steve, you're welcome to join us up here. Look forward to your remarks. And he's also the author of the bill that set up the local task force. And Tim is on that. And also, is it Jenna from WNIU? She's the news director. She's also on that task force. Senator Steve South.
Hard to believe I've been a state senator for 10 years already. I can't believe how quickly the time goes. And notice that Congressman Manzullo did not say the Illinois General Assembly was the cat's meow. No, tonight's one of those moments in life when you kind of realize it can take some funny twists and turns. I was a reporter covering the congressman, and now we're here in the same venue, talking about the same thing, figuring out how to save local journalism. The whole thing is just kind of bizarre to me, but life really definitely moves on and takes different paths that you never ever would imagine. And so, but I'm glad to be here, and thank you, Rockford University, for hosting this event. So, for those who don't remember, I worked at Channel 17 for almost 25 years as a reporter and main anchor, and time went fast. I can't believe I was there that long. I worked for the ABC affiliate. And then back in 2012, as Don mentioned, I decided to run for politics. And the biggest question I still go, why did you do that? People still don't understand that. But when Tim mentioned the stats as far as local newspapers that have been closing across the country and in the rural parts of the country, including Illinois, I was aware of that. Someone who's been in journalism, you're aware of what the media landscape is, how it's changing. And I was aware of that when I worked in the business and TV news, and I'm certainly aware of that now I'm in politics. But I think that made me even more aware that something needs to be done because the current trend is not friendly. Thousands of newspapers have closed the doors. I didn't, think about necessarily just all newspapers. I think we're hurting when it comes to the local journalism coverage, whether it's any media, whether it's radio, TV, and of course newspapers really caught my immediate attention. That's kind of the thrust of why we formed this task force. But really, I think local coverage is decreasing all across the landscape, and that's not good for a number of different reasons. You may think, well, why would an elected official, politicians care whether you have a reporter covering you or covering local news? Well, it does matter. I think one of the biggest frustration now that I'm in elected office is just the lack of awareness of what's going on, the lack of awareness of the issues. The misinformation that was talked about. That makes my job and other elected officials' jobs extremely hard. And we don't have local news coverage of the issues. That just makes the whole process very, very difficult. It is a threat to democracy, especially at the local level. A lot of times, local journalists, a local newspaper kind of define the community. They increase awareness. They let you know what's going on. People want to know what's going on. And when you have local newspapers no longer there, that destroys the fabric of a community. And I think goes to the heart of a threat of democracy. You need reporters at that local school board meeting. You need a reporter at the city council meeting. How else are you going to know what's going on? And I'm not going to say, elected officials will purposely hide things, but you need that journalistic watchdog spotlight on any level of government, whether it's local, whether it's the state government or the national level. Obviously, I think people are aware of the national level, and we have cable news networks that are fighting for an audience and trying to cover things the way we want to cover. But I think at the local level, it's just extremely difficult. We don't have reporters covering what's going on. So with that in mind, it was actually 2 years ago, and have been a former journalist myself and seeing that some other states are kind of tackling the subject, I'm thinking, let's put a task force together. And it's made up of journalists, former journalists, people from the academic field, such as Medill. We have groups representing different journalists of different neighborhoods and ethnicities. Try to get as comprehensive as possible task force of people representing many different viewpoints. Let's sit them down for a few months, talk about ideas, what we can do to move this forward. As we mentioned, the media landscape has been changing for a long time, but it's changing, especially quick now with the technology. So we put the task force together. We've met once, I believe, already. We're going to be, or is it twice already? Twice already, and we're going to be meeting a third time next week, I think. And just interviewing people who are on the ground. For example, this coming week, we're going to be talking to two people who actually kind of did their own solo effort, right? One was a former newspaper reporter, but she went back to her local community and just kind of did a one-man, two-person shop as far as covering the news online, just because their local newspaper is shut down. So it's kind of interesting to see how, in a way, things kind of, resolve themselves. But I think this is going to take a bigger effort to try to help the media in the situation. But we're trying to cover from all different angles. So I'm really looking forward to see how this task force comes about and some of the recommendations. Some people might think, well, why should government be involved in local government or local media coverage? Why can't this be a private sector issue? Why should government be involved at all? It's a very good question. We may come to the conclusion that there isn't a role for state government when it comes to helping local journalism. I don't believe that. I think there are things that we can do, but I think it is a fundamental interest to make sure at the state government level that local communities are covered, that their reporters are covering local meetings. I think that's in very much elected officials' viewpoint and concern that local news and coverage is there. I think it helps democracy. It helps us do our jobs. I think one of the biggest frustrations, as I mentioned, people just don't know what's going on in the community. And a lot of times at the state level, they're just misinformed and they don't understand the issues. And I think not having local journalists definitely contributes to that problem. And as Tim mentioned as well, when you don't have local coverage and people aren't aware of the issues, what happens? Misinformation fills that vacuum, right? Instead of getting it from the local newspaper, they're online, and you can go. If there's studies that show that you will go online to what you want your viewpoints to be confirmed, right? People don't like necessarily to hear the opposite viewpoint, and I think that's part of the reason we have this polarization politically. But I think people need a central gathering spot to get their news so people can agree on the facts. If people can't agree on the facts and what's happening, how do you pass policy when you can't agree on the facts? It's a very difficult process. So again, that's another reason why I think state government has to figure out what's going on. So I hopefully the task force will meet in the next few months, and I'll hope to introduce some legislation early next year. And it could range from a number of things: tax credits that could help employers hire more reporters. Do we help local businesses, give them an incentive to advertise with their local publication? Do we help subsidize subscribers, for example? Another issue we probably will look at is the big tech companies get a lot of local news content, and they put it online and through their medium for free. And there's nothing goes back to local reporters, local organizations who gather that news, and they're just making money off the backs of local journalism. We need to somehow change that. We need to come up with new business models to make sure local news is viable moving forward. So great task ahead. I'm looking forward to it, and happy to answer the questions afterwards. So appreciate the time. So you want to introduce Mark? So another strange twist and turn that life can bring you. Of course, Mark was a reporter for the Registrar for a long time. So we are, of course, somewhat competitors, a different medium, obviously. But when I got into politics, strange how things work. He didn't have a job at the time. And so he's now my chief of staff. So I value his skills. He obviously knows about journalism and the media and how to to work with the media, but also politically, he's in the Rockford Alderman as well. So he's been my chief of staff since I got in office. So Mark Bonnie.
So thank you. I am also happy to be here, and thank you to former Congressman Manzullo for organizing this, because this is a really important subject. And I always shudder to have to follow the senator, because he is the TV guy and I'm a print guy, and we just don't do as well. I told the mayor the morning after the election, we'll see how this goes, because my best words come out of my fingertips, not out of my mouth. So I guess I would just, again, my background is entirely in print, and so I would maybe want to give some perspective on the changes in the news business here at the print, especially news business here at the local level in Rockford. And as the senator pointed out, it's interesting because obviously all of us up here, most of us up here, have all worked together across the various forms of news media. And there's at least 3 of my former colleagues in the audience. Steve Newton, when I was an intern at the Register Star, hired by Mike DeDonker, a name a few people might recognize, was in the newsroom. And of course, Kevin and Wally Haas. Wally was the editorial page editor for many, many years, and I didn't work with Kevin all that long. By the time he came in, I was leaving. Maybe a year or two, I forget. But it was actually only at the Register Star 11 years, although I was in the business 20 years. I started out at the Northwest Herald, which is a suburban daily in the Crystal Lake area, and then was a freelance correspondent covering McHenry County for the Tribune before I came back to Rockford. But some of the numbers that Don cited, we had a brief conversation, and I get asked on a probably weekly, maybe at least monthly basis, at people commenting on the lack of news, and in particular because I worked at the Register Star, and I don't mean this in any way to dig at the Register Star, but the diminished size in many ways of the Register Star. So when I left, I've been gone now, it'll be 18 years in December. So I've been gone longer than I was there. And but when I left, there were 400 employees in the building. About 75 of those were in the newsroom. I believe there are 6 staffers. I believe there's a couple of vacant positions, but so 6 to 8 news staffers. And then I believe there are 2 circulation employees and 1 or 2 advertising salespeople left. So 10-ish max. And so the circulation of the newspaper when I left was, I believe, about 90,000 Sundays, 75,000 weekdays. I've been told by an advertiser that that is down to about 20,000 on Sundays and under 10 on weekdays. That doesn't, of course, count their digital reading, and I don't know what that is. But the resources of just the Register Star alone, that's a substantial, both in resources and reach, substantial decline. I won't speak to how it's affected television, but certainly it's affected radio. I've given recently as an example, in between working for the senator and the Register Star, I was at the Rockford School District as the chief communications officer. And there was an incident that most of you are probably aware of at Auburn High School involving a student who had a skull injury during a confrontation with the school police officer. And I had a number of people ask me what I thought about that. I really never asked why they were asking. Was it because I'm an alderman? Was it Rockford Police? Was it because I used to work in the school district? But my immediate thought then and now is that what was shocking to me about it, separate from the incident itself, was that it was a whole year before this, from the incident until the news, it became public in the news. And then it was only through the Chicago media, because the attorney for the family was a Chicago attorney who spoke with the Chicago media, and then the story broke here in Rockford. And I just find that so hard to fathom, because when I was at the school district, when I was at the newspaper, when Eric and Senator were, well, Eric still is, and then, there used to be something like that would happen, and teachers would pick up the phone and call talk radio. Talk radio, it would go out immediately on talk radio, and then television and print had to respond, or they would call directly into the newspaper or television. I don't think that happens that much anymore. And again, that's all. I guess what I'm trying to emphasize is how things have changed in so many ways. Another factor is, and I don't know if it's again chicken or the egg, but there are a lot of my former colleagues who are now employed in the PR business. Many government organizations now, city included, more notably the school district, have several people who are communication staffs of several people. That didn't used to be the case. When I started at the Rockford School District, I was I was a one-man shop. After there had been a communications department, it had been shuttered for about 3 years, and it is substantially larger now. And I think that is part of that is a result of sort of the disaggregation of news. That it's news is still out there, but it's harder to find. You have to work more to find it. And it used to be that it was mentioned, there's hard news, breaking news, there's community events. I have done a lot of event planning at the school district for the senator, and it used to be that if you could get an event on the cover of the Register Star's Go section, you were gold. It was all you needed to do to guarantee a crowd. Now, I mean, it's and although most people now have the ability through Facebook and other social media to self-promote their events, the reach of all of those are smaller than probably the reach of the Go section of the Register Star was at the time. So I think it's a vastly different landscape, and I though like to try to. I was a print subscriber until this time last year, when I thought I had lost my ATM card and had to replace it. That severed my auto pay, and newspaper kept coming for quite a while, and eventually I finally switched to digital. And I struggle every morning when I print the crossword and the crypto quote. I'm like, I hate this, and I should go back to print. Should go back to the print product. But I guess I like to try to remind myself that the word newspaper, the product is the news, the paper is the medium. And if will we live to see there be no more newspapers at all anymore? Who knows? I don't know if there's maybe Kevin will. I don't know, but this audience and myself are a little older. I don't know, but if you think in those terms that what's important is the news and not the way it's delivered, then yes, it's hope. I think there's a lot of hope. I personally have a lot of hope for as a model, the nonprofit model. If you think about it, that's how public television and NPR have survived for many years. And I think that at least in the newspaper industry, you could definitely make the case for one of, besides the competition from technology, and definitely make a case for corporate greed contributing to the decline of newspapers, because I think it's, in many cases, it's not that that there's no profit to be made. There's just not enough profit to please corporate owners and shareholders. And so, I think there are a lot of options for the future, but I think it will, time will tell. And but I'm optimistic. And I guess with that, I will let you introduce the next speaker. Okay, thank you.
I kind of feel a little bit guilty because people I'm introducing used to interview me, and they can tell you about the accountability. Linda Grist Cunningham was always interested in what I did, and back in those days, Gannett had their own reporter that was assigned to me when I was in Congress, and she did an outstanding job. So much that I said something wrong because I was tired. She said, "No, Don, you said this. Is that what you really mean?" And I thought, what a great journalist. She wasn't looking for a gotcha moment. She just knew I had said something wrong. And that's the way it was in those days, and getting out more and more information. Eric Wilson is here for several reasons. One of those is the fact that he teaches journalism at the Rock Valley College, and we've asked him to share what he sees in journalism students, what's the future of that, what's going on, and also the fact that TV stations have the same revenue problem as printed media, and they have a difficult time being able to hire local reporters, and I'm sure you'll address that. So, Eric, thank you for coming directly from the Boone County Fair, and appreciate having you here.
Yeah, my first remark was going to be apologize for my lateness and apologize for the casual dress, because I'm clearly the most underdressed person on the panel. But that's not a lie. I truly came from Boone County Fair today. And you're always going to be congressman to me, not former congressman. I grew up with you as the congressman, and I say grew up in my broadcasting career with you as our congressman. So you'll always be. It's kind of weird to be up here as some expert, because I don't consider myself an expert. I've been doing it a long time, but hopefully I can provide some perspective, I think, from some of the things, or from some of the angles that the congressman mentioned. And Mark, don't sell yourself short, because there were days where you were on television. Remember, you said something about your career only being in print. You were really sweaty, but you did some television appearances. So you do have that under your belt as well. Right. You can sweat and nobody knows it. So I just want to give you a little bit of a background on me to kind of explain my route to where I'm at, and part of why I'm up here. Again, Congressman touched on it briefly, but I started in radio here in Rockford years ago, and it wasn't even in news. It was top 40 radio. I was a top 40 DJ. I spent 3.5 years doing that. 2.5 of those years, though, I worked in television as well. So I like to tell my students, and sometimes the people who work for us, when they complain that they have to work 6 days in a row, or that they have to work 10 hours instead of 8 hours. For 2.5 years, I worked 7 days. I worked at the radio station from Monday to Saturday, and a little bit inside baseball, but the television station wanted to hire me to do weather on Saturday and Sunday. The radio station wouldn't give me Saturdays off, so I made a deal where I would do weather every Sunday on the television station, and then I would fill in on the morning show on when someone was on vacation. So there were weeks where I would do my air shift from 7 to midnight. I'd go home and take a nap, and then I'd be at the television station by 3. And that was when They had just launched the morning show relatively recently when I first got hired over there. So it was only an hour long. Now everybody does like our station between two stations, because technically we're two stations. We do 4 hours of morning news from 5 to 9. But when I did it, it was an hour. I think it started as a half hour, quickly went to an hour. But so it wasn't as much news to produce back then. So, that's 30 years ago in radio, 26 years in television. And other than a 2-year forced hiatus from television, I've been in broadcasting since 1993. I started working here in 93, moved here in 1994. So my first radio job that I mentioned was at Top 40. It was at 97 ZOK, 97 ZOK with Legacy WROK. Hi, Fred. Fred was one of the first friends I made when I moved to Rockford. But the funny thing is that I was on the air 7 to midnight, and regularly Fred would be there at 11 o'clock filing a story and go home and take a nap and then be back by 4 p.m. to get the morning newscast ready. To watch that work ethic was invaluable to me. And I don't think I've ever said that to you, Fred, but it was really, you set a fine example to some snot-nosed kid who was just wanting to play music, but had this interest in doing news. And to see how hard you worked was pretty impressive. At the time, and this kind of, I think, fits with the whole theme of why we're here. At the time, it was family owned. I mean, it was the Nolte family. Fred would be the first person. I never knew Vern, but I was there for John. And then kind of the transition when John was getting ready to sell the place. But for the longest time, it was this family owned. They treated everybody very well. So I was there and I witnessed the transformation. That seems kind of like an ominous word, but the transformation from local family owned to like corporate group owned. That was Connoisseur Broadcasting, right, Fred? I think they were the first corporate owners. And I mean, there's some good and bad to that. They certainly had more money. At the time, we had a general manager that was brought in. And so it was my first radio job, and I didn't really have any experience knowing like how things worked or what the process was. But everybody else knew that this general manager was brought in to make it a lean, mean fighting machine so that they could sell it. That was basically what he was brought in to do. That's when Connoisseur came in. So, I mean, it was kind of a weird transition, but to me, it didn't affect me all that much, but it was certainly from family to corporate owned. My first television job in town was at the station which shall not be named. But they weren't family owned at first, this is kind of a weird morph too. So they originally were owned by, it was, I think, ML Media Partners, but it was Merrill Lynch. And they owned it as an investment property, is how they owned our station with a couple of others, I believe. And then Quincy Broadcasting came in and took it over. Quincy, technically a corporation, but really family owned. Like 3 generations of their family ran the place. So it was sort of like the best of both worlds, and I got to see that come into play. So I've been in the small family-owned situation. I've been in the relatively large corporate/family-owned situation. And now I work for, and again, a little inside baseball, I work for Nexstar Broadcasting, which is the largest station ownership group in the country. If I have the stats right, and I don't think anybody here from our sales department is here to correct, but I believe we have we're in 115 markets. I think that's right. 115 markets, and technically like 68% coverage. And it's pretty wide, right? So what I can say of that is that, it's this huge corporation that I work for, which again is kind of the focus of, I don't know if this is a good idea, of our event tonight. But I can tell you from experience, they've treated me well. And they have been really hands-off when it comes to news content, I can say. And I think that's part of the concern as well, is that when you have fewer ownership groups that are dictating, like we have never had, unless there was, again, more inside baseball. So our CEO is Perry Sook. We call him Uncle Perry. Don't record that, Jordan. And although this whole thing is being recorded, right? Oh, that's a bad idea. But every once in a while, he'll do something charitable, maybe, that we'll run a story about. But I bet that's happened. I worked for the station 7 years, I believe. Do the math right? 7.5 almost. And I think that's happened twice. But as far as news content, we've never been told you're running this story. You must run this story. It's never happened. And And I can tell you that we regularly get people who are in public. In fact, we had one person at Boone County Fair today who insisted that people were telling us what stories to run and what stories not to run. And it's just simply not true. It's not true. But so they've kind of been hands off. The other aspect of why Congressman invited me was I do teach at Rockford College, and I love it. And I never thought that I would like it as much as I did because I never really taught. In my 2-year hiatus, I worked in the admissions department at Rock Valley. Part of that job was going to local high schools and talking to kids about college. And there were days when I would spend 3 days in a row talking to every single English class at the Rockville high schools. And a couple of things about that were eye-opening. First of all, is that I could tell, and sometimes it didn't matter the school too. Like there are certain, let's be honest, there are certain schools that have a reputation of being a great school or a lousy school. I can tell you that when I would go into school that had this lousy reputation, oh man, you got to go to that school. I had some of the most attentive students who asked some of the greatest questions. And then you'd go to a school that was supposed to be a cakewalk, milk run school, and they would be terrible and not pay attention and be disruptive. I still remember the one time that I was in a classroom and there was a student who had his or her head down the whole time, wasn't paying attention to a word I said. But they weren't disruptive. They didn't cause any trouble. And I just moved along. And usually at the end of the presentation, I would open it up to questions. And that student came up to me afterwards and asked a pertinent question and probably the best question of anybody in the group. And so it kind of changed my perspective as well of what's going on in schools. And I had 2 different teachers say, have you ever thought about being a teacher? And I was like, no. I have enough trouble just handling a daughter. Like how am I going to handle a whole room full of kids? And then I'll make this as short as I can, but while I was at Rock Valley College, the dean found out I was on campus, wanted to know, they needed adjuncts and asked the chair of the department if I could teach. And he and I had actually discussed it, the chair and I didn't have a master's degree. And the dean said, well, but he has 19 years, 20 years experience. That should be good enough. So the chair of the department, Jerry Levi, who's the whole reason I teach now, he did the work, looked in with the state of Illinois, and because of my experience and the way the class was categorized, that work experience was enough. So I started teaching, and they moved the goalposts on me. Midway through, I think it was my second semester teaching, the college started going through accreditation, and they said, okay, well, now we're changing the classification of this course, and you have to have someone who teaches has a master's degree because of its transferability. And so because I liked teaching so much that I had no idea I would enjoy so much, I ended up getting a master's. It's basically what I spent COVID doing was getting a master's degree at Texas Tech. So go Red Raiders, guns up. So I went through that process because I found this part of the job that I didn't know I would enjoy, and I really liked it. To me, the best part of it was seeing the immediate gratification and helping students. What I liked the most about working in admissions was I used to help, like when I would go and talk to these kids in high school at Rockford high schools, I could tell when I was the first person who had ever even planted the seed that they could go to college, that was even a possibility for them. And you could see it in their eyes. And then so when I worked at Rock Valley in the admissions department, I was helping students actually realize that. And I saw the end result. And so as an admissions counselor, we were really just supposed to get them in the door and then have the guidance and the advisors, the academic advisors, take it from there. But we had multiple students who would come to us second semester to ask us to help them pick their classes because the academic advisors are so overwhelmed that they couldn't see everybody face to face. And so we would have free time and help. And it was the best part of the whole job was being able to help them. And like, I'm a nerd. So like when they needed all these classes and the times and the days just fit together like that, it was the greatest feeling. And so I get to do that on a little scale right now while I'm teaching. But one thing that I noticed from teaching that was really eye-opening is how bad they were at writing. And so the class that I taught existed before I taught it. So I basically inherited it with a syllabus, and assignments, and all that stuff. And I quickly realized that there was this much when it came to like grammar stuff in this writing course. 2 weeks in this course, maybe 2 assignments is maybe more fair. I realized that I needed to expand like teaching them this stuff. And so I did like 2 full lectures on grammar things, and I showed them Schoolhouse Rock stuff. You know, I'm weird because I don't want to be like the straight up lecturer guy. So I tried to do, you know, something educational to tie into it. But I noticed that. And so these are the young people who are being trained to be the journalists. So that's kind of how I see it in the classroom. But as far as like hiring goes, what I've noticed, and I get this sense too, the more classes that I've teach. I've taught since the first semester I taught was spring of 2017. So I've been teaching pretty much every semester except for summers since then. And now I teach 3 different classes, but the first one was multimedia writing. But what I noticed, and it comes up in our hiring too, is that a lot of the people that, at the very least, a lot of the people that apply for our jobs, they're not so interested in being reporters or news people. They want to be YouTube stars or TikTok influencers. Like that's what they want to do. And so I try as much as I can in class to sort of tell them what the difference is. And then when we hire people, I sometimes have to explain. Sometimes they just get it. Eventually, like they're like, oh, this isn't really what I did. This is what it is. We'll leave because they feel like, oh, that's not for me. But some of them will think, well, I really want to do this. And they're interested in the storytelling part. So when it comes to hiring, that's one of the challenges I think we see as well. Some people leave for pay issues. So small market television is notorious for being low paying. Part of that is because you kind of look at it, and I never in a million years compare my job to being a doctor, but we kind of look at it as like a teaching hospital where young people come, they probably have never had a job out of college, and they learn, you know, certainly the technical things like the editing, some of the writing, and then hopefully they learn more and some of the performance stuff, because let's be honest, there's an aspect of it, at least on television, that is performance. And then they learn more of the writing and like how to write a balanced story. It's like that. You know, you have to send someone out sometimes when they do one interview and you're like, okay, that's great, but what about the people who are against that idea? And sometimes they think, oh, I never realized that I have to like they get in their heads like they get a news release and they're going to write something about this news release, and they go, something's connected to this news release. But you know, maybe this news release is about maybe not even a controversial topic. It's about a development that's being built somewhere. There's bound to be somebody who's against it, so they really need to put some effort in to find it. A lot of the times they're defaulting to. We had one reporter years ago who this person's default was, oh, if it's on Facebook, I should do a story about it. Oh, is right. And then, I mean, there's a whole nother aspect of the social media reporters that would take a whole hour. I'm not going to take that up. I already promised I was going to talk short now, and it's longer than I intended. But thank you, Congressman. But the one other thing that I just want to bring up, and I will introduce. But when I talked about how this is kind of like it's like a teaching hospital, right? And people come here for a few years and they move on. Some people would stay longer. But even in the initial job right now, we are competing with, and I sort of blame this because it really reared its head during COVID when every industry was struggling to find people. That applied to us, but it also applied to big market television stations too. And so these big market television stations are hiring some people directly out of school, which never happened before. Sometimes they're hiring people with maybe a year or so experience with us. We just had a producer who he'd been with us for not quite 2 years. He's a morning show producer now at WGN in Chicago. WGN's our sister station. They're also a Next Star station too. So we share content with them sometimes. It helps out a little bit. But like pay-wise, we can't compete with Chicago. Normally it was they'd come here for a year or two, maybe go someplace like Madison or to Milwaukee, and then go to Chicago. Now, regularly, we have people who are here a very short period of time with us, and they jump straight to Chicago. And you can't blame them really. And, part of it is that old men like me aren't going anywhere. So there's no job for them to move up into. So they want more experience. They have to go to a bigger city like that. So those are kind of the struggles that we're facing. I think I covered more than what I wanted to and intended to, and got the buzzer flashing lights to get me off the stage. But I appreciate you being here. And Congressman, do you want to introduce Mike? Because I could do it. Mike and I go way back to our golf play day days, right? Mike Patterson is the market manager for Midwest Family Broadcasting. He'll go into a little bit more detail about his job and the struggles. But yeah, Mike and I became friends once on the golf course because he talked about remembering listening to me from Madison when I was on the air in Rockford. And I was like, wow, this guy's really cool. So be very cool, Mike Patterson.
Eric was on the air at ZOK when I was on the air at Z104 in Madison. I worked at the Wisconsin State Journal from like 4 in the afternoon until 10:30 when we had the first edition. And then I'd go up 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the air at Z104 in Madison. And then I'd go to class at the University of Wisconsin. So I can echo, there's two things I want to accomplish today. I want to talk a little bit about radio, and then I'm standing in for Kevin Mutz because they asked Kevin to be here, and Kevin's like, bro, that ain't my thing. Let me get you to Mike. And we're going to talk about why we founded the Rockford Current. And Kevin's doing a great job back there covering this event, and I thank him for being on our team each day. But first, we're talking about the demise of local news a lot. The gentleman to my left, I think, deserves applause for the Medill School of Journalism and the work that group has done in the last month to bring to light the hazing at the football program at Northwestern. And that wouldn't have happened without student reporters at the university. So round of applause there for that work. Whether or not we know it, it's still happening. And as a University of Wisconsin graduate, that might be the first compliment I've ever given Northwestern. Yeah. So one of the first lessons you learn in radio or in editing a newspaper is keep it brief, bright, and tight, and be entertaining, informative. So I'm going to be brief, bright, and tight and get off the stage so you guys can ask questions. But a couple things. I'm the president of Midwest Family. The misnomer in that is Midwest Family is family owned. We are not. We are a family of companies. There's 6 companies within Midwest Family. We all operate independently. I admire Nexstar a ton. Perry's done building from one radio television station to 122 or whatever the number is now is outrageously successful. That's very helpful when you're looking down on Wednesday and saying, we got a fun paper fight. What are we going to do? It doesn't matter. You pool all your money and everybody in LA, New York, Rockford, Illinois, and Louisville gets paid. I sit in the office. My job each day as the president of Midwest Family in Rockford, I got to make sure everybody gets paid every 2 weeks, because as much as people come to work in the media passionate about it, if that check ain't in the bank at midnight on Thursday, they're not coming back the next day. So the reality check is we love media. We love everybody that consumes it. People that do it still want to get paid. So my biggest job each day is to oversee the team and make sure the bills get paid and the employees get paid. And we do that through advertising. So a couple of things to echo as we move forward. I heard a lot today. But to give you a quick advertiser perspective, the hardest part about our business now is when local businesses close. Those local businesses that advertise that then close, that hurts. There's a retailer over here, just down the street on Perryville. Great guy. Closed shop up. That was $4,500 a month, every month that came into the radio station. When they closed last September or stopped advertising in March, that money vanished. So when I look at the yellow pad, I do a yellow pad test. My job became, how do I do this? Because I can't count on that $4,500 every month. And then when that 45, and so then that's one side of the ledger. And over here, it's what happens over here. That's just one example. We did an exercise today in one of our meetings. I think in Rockford, we've had 10 to 12 local advertisers retire, close up for different reasons in the last year. I'm not going to name names. You see them on TV, you hear them on the radio. When they vanish, for all the right reasons, there's a store down this way that the gentleman's going to retire. He's stopping advertising at the end of August. He has a TV contract. He has a radio contract. I don't know what the dollars are for. He's going to go on vacation for a long time. We're still going to sit here and say, I can't count on that money. And now the first thing people are going to say, well, get better salespeople. We try. We're really good at screening. I think we've really developed some talents and assessments that we can find our way through. But if there's not businesses opening call them, there's nobody that can advertise. That's just one component of it. And there's attorneys in the room, so I say this lightly, because they are much better experts in the IRS and FEIN numbers in that process. But last year, Winnebago County was negative businesses opening by FEIN numbers. That makes it hard to manage each day. So the next thing to highlight, somebody mentioned YouTube and TikTok up here. What's the number one radio station in Rockford, Illinois, right now? YouTube. Eric's here, Ed's there. So I hesitate to say this because I might not be 100% correct. What's the number one TV station for Rockford, Illinois right now? YouTube. YouTube. People younger than me are not making distinctions of whether they're watching it on a VHF, a UHF, a video platform, their phone, their tablet, their computer. Here's what you need to know about YouTube. Who owns it? Google. Is Google regulated by the FCC? And if something that goes wrong at our building, what does somebody have to do? We file a report at the FCC. I'm in the process of actually trying to expand our business and buy another company, not in Rockford. There's a lot of non-disclosure in place. Please ask questions, or I'll lawyer up. As I work with a lot of these financial people, they are still interested in broadcast, television, and radio. There's some positives that I'll come to in a second. When I explain the process to novices about how to work with broadcast and television, radios, and acquisitions, they're like, oh, that's great. We'll fund this and we'll close in 40 days. Sorry, there's an official in here also. Have you ever worked with the government before? In order to transfer our license, it's going to take a minimum of 90 to 120 days, and that's if everything's clean. When Maverick Media transferred the license from Maverick to Midwest Family, it took 16 months because there was an issue in the file of one of the stations at Rockford. If Google, Facebook decide to do something tomorrow, it crushes your local media. I am not calling for regulations. We can address that in a minute with AM radio. But the reality check is we wake up each day and we think we're battling 17, 13, register star for ad dollars each day. We are battling Facebook. We are battling Google. We are battling Spotify. And heck, our salespeople resell Spotify. That's the demand that's out there. Advertisers look at us and they trust us because we know how to do marketing. They're like, can you help me with my Spotify? Oh, yeah, we got a 30-second commercial. We can air that for you. We buy it, put the credit card in, pay Spotify immediately. We bill our advertisers, and sometimes they pay us net 30. Sometimes it's Rockford, Illinois. They pay us net 91. Dirty secret of our community. That's, as we talk money, that's where we go. We started the Rock River Current. I'll transition because I want to keep it brief, bright, and tight. We looked down and we said, we need a news presence. We didn't have a news presence in our building. And we started the Rock River Current as all right, there's a lot of news in this town. I oversee our Springfield, Illinois market as part of our company. Springfield, Illinois is one television station. We have 4. They're in a TV market with Champaign and Decatur and a whole bunch of other counties. We have 2 counties in our TV market, maybe Ogle, maybe Stevenson, count in there also. But we wake up and look at 4 television stations each morning. I feel for what you guys do. And especially when I heard you run 4 hours of local news in the morning, that's a lot of inventory. So once that plane leaves the airport and those seats aren't sold, it's like, remember the days of Priceline? There's a plane going to LA and we got to sell the seat before midnight. So it's $20 if you want it. That's what a lot of times what happens to ad inventory. If we got somebody that calls tomorrow and says, "Can I get on?" and we're not sold out, okay, we get it for you. And they're out there doing that. That changes the game for all of us each and every day, no matter how good your sales team is. But we started the Rock River Current not because there was a huge need for news in this town. We did a great job reporting on crime, the courts, car chases. We saw this opportunity to bring to light what wasn't coming out anymore, which was stories like, when's the fish fry happening? What's happening with business news in our community? Somebody mentioned the Go section and how you wanted to be a part of that because it was 30 pages and it listed every restaurant, and every opening and closing, and bake sale, and different ways. And as I've been talking to a lot of different finance people for the stuff I've been working on, they're like, why should we even be interested in your business? And this is where we lean into the Rock River Current a little bit. And I said, when people want to lean into their community, they come to their local media. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's 17, 13, 100.5, 104.9, they lean into their local community because that brings them a sense of connection and community. We mentioned it earlier about churches and the sense of loneliness. When people want to lean out, and I'm guilty of it too, we turn on Pandora, we turn on Spotify, we turn on our music collection. When Eric and I were DJs, if you wanted to pick up a side gig and you did a wedding, you had whole crates of CDs into, now DJs show up and they plug their phone in and they got 2,500 songs on their phone and they have a playlist up for the show each night. They plug it into some speakers and they go. They're lazy. I'm just kidding. But that's the reality check. And so as we go forward, I think the biggest challenge that we face in media, and I love the business. I crave it. I think about 18, 19 hours a day. It keeps me up at night. It keeps me going. I follow the rule of thirds. You have 1/3 good days, 1/3 okay days, and 1/3 bad days. Because if you have good days, something ain't right. If you have all bad days, something ain't right. So you want to be in that area somewhere. And we don't have all good days in the business. We don't have all bad days in the business. We don't have all in between days. But there's a ton of disintermediation out there. The verticals we used to have. I have news. I have television. I have newspaper. I have radio. Those verticals are blown up. Just gone. It allows us to do things like create the Rock River Current. But we also have to understand that that's the cause of where all this is going, because it's going because of the economic behind the scenes. Another thing to understand about music is you don't need radio for music anymore. I go to the country radio seminar annually in Nashville. Last year, 40% of the attendees, about 80% of the content was about streaming. Not about terrestrial broadcast. It's about streaming, and it's about how many plays do you get on Spotify, how many plays do you get on YouTube, how many downloads did you get. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about did WUSN in Chicago add my record, so it's going to get spun and it's going to get added in places like Rockford and Danville and Decatur and Lafayette and Columbia, Missouri and Paducah. That is almost irrelevant. Record companies used to walk into Rockford, Illinois and say, here's $1,500, play our record. It wasn't that blazing. But it would be like $1,500 in concert tickets or $1,500 in a trip here, and they would add 10 new records. That is gone. Chicago used to have a staff of 20 record reps that all hung out near WXRT on the north side and drank beer in bars. They'd come out to Rockford to records, they get you to add them, they take you to dinner at Leno's and buy you cocktails, and magically the song would appear on the radio the next Tuesday. That's gone because Spotify's there, YouTube's there. So as we work forward, it's how do we keep finding a business model that allows us to pay employees every Thursday. Pay ComEd because they'll turn you really fast. And provide that service. We all work together to do that. That's going to be our best way. Yes. Sorry. Midwest Family has 95.3 The Bull, 100.5 Rockford's Greatest Hits, B103, 104.9X. Sports Fan 1330. We also operate 94.9 out of DeKalb, out of our building. They have a storefront presence in DeKalb due to the back office here. So those are our 5 stations. Lastly, talk radio, because I know we'll get a question about it later. What about the demise of talk radio? There's 2 reasons. Social media. In 2006, Mark Zuckerberg went to Harvard. There was no Facebook. Jack Dorsey was hanging out in St. Louis. Twitter hadn't been invented yet. Talk radio flourished. Because if you wanted to share your opinion, you had to call a phone number, get through a call screener, and have something to say. By 2010 and 2011, you didn't have to wait till somebody signed on at 3 p.m. for your local content to tell us how much you need to hear. You could do it right at 1:30 when you had that thought, and I'm like, I'm going to Twitter and I'm going to blast this out. Social media changed the context of our game. Social media also gave voice to people who need an editor. That's one of the biggest challenges on that side. You flip it, having sold talk radio at WSB in Atlanta, which is the #1 billing radio station in America, I have 3 years experience in there. We could only call on 50% of the advertisers because the other 50% wanted nothing to do with you. I do not want my business associated with that programming, and it has nothing to do with red versus blue. They don't want to be a part of controversy. So immediately, if your business is cut in half, the available customers inside of the business, you got to be really good at that 50%. Keep them coming back. That's before you get into the day-to-day costs. And the third challenge with talk radio and content in general, content is really expensive. Really expensive. We've learned that by watching the Disney company the last 6 months. Is how many layoffs have they done? What are they cutting? Really good content is expensive. So if you think about it, and to wrap up, and again, following Eric's lead, and I probably went too long, should have given me a teleprompter. There's content, there's delivery, and then there's distribution. Content is Eric sitting on the news desk at 10 p.m. Delivery is how do you deliver that content? Audio, video, written word. Distribution is how you get it out to the public. In our sense, if you look at radio in 1950, the content was the announcer. It went out over an AM transmitter that you got on a receiver. It was all audio. Today, Chelsea Meyer, graduate of Eric's program at RVC, fantastic employee. She hosts the morning show on B103. She also creates content on TikTok. That's the content. We deliver it audio and video. We distribute it TikTok, YouTube, 31 FM, a newsletter, our website, our app. How do you find it? That applies to news also. The car crash on the corner of State and Alpine, that's the content. How do you deliver it? Video, audio, written word. And it's distributed off the back of the station, 5 a.m. to your front doorstep, to your phone with an alert from your app, to your newsletter with a news alert, to we break into the radio program to say, traffic is shut down on Highway 20 because of an accident. Avoid it. That says we put it into context. That's where the world has moved faster. And now, I'll let Don introduce Northwest.
Before I do that, I want to thank Bergstrom and Dave Rydell for audio and video that's broadcast. Broadcast is the wrong word. That's being streamed on the internet. Sometimes we find people never heard. We don't know their voices or who they are, but they're very much interested in the topic. And Dave Rydell, there he is. Let's give a big applause to Dave Rydell and Bergstrom. Thank you, Dave. And then the other thing is that Craig Curry, Rockford Register Star, is listed as a participant. She called last night about 10 o'clock, and she was almost in tears, and she said, Don, I've got a conflict that came up at the last minute that I just have to go there. And I said, story of the Rockford newspaper will be told by the people who are here. And I think they've already told the story of what's going on there. Our next, I was going to say our next witness. Sometimes you never make it out of the courtroom, huh? Chris Linden is a graduate of Medill. And I've gotten to know him the past year and a half. I wrote a book. I went to the guys at the Northwest Quarterly, and they very generously donated a 1-minute video and the website. It's enabled me to sell my book, and in the course of that, we've become very close friends. He represents the media of the magazine and what's going on there. Want to come up?
Well, thank you, Don. Thanks for the opportunity to join us here tonight. So I come at it from a little different experience. You've heard tonight from television folks, radio folks, people who work in newspapers. I come from a little bit different generation in that I never worked at a newspaper. I worked with television briefly, never worked with radio. My bread and butter has been magazines. I work at Northwest Quarterly magazine. We're a city regional publication that serves the greater Rockford area. Between the different publications, we right now serve 5 different publications that together cover northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and northern Indiana. So we cover a wide range of territory. We bring a very different kind of perspective in what we do and how we deliver it. It's also interesting for me hearing some of the different comments tonight. I graduated from Medill about 15 years ago. And ever since I was in high school, I've been working in various media forums. Throughout that whole time, I've had an opportunity to hear the message time and time again about the state of the journalism world and media and how things are changing. That I've been on the forefront of it really for my entire career. I can remember even being at Northwestern, and our professors would say, okay, you go turn in your story, but you better make sure it's written so you can put it in a newspaper or a website. Better make sure you come back with audio, and you better find a video to go with it. And that's been in my mind ever since. There's also been another story or theme that has come up time and time again, and that's the thing that says critics who are screaming at our epitaph. They like to say things like, print is dead. But tonight I want to leave you with a hopeful note and tell you, no, print and newspaper and magazines, we're not going anywhere. Okay, why do you say that, Chris? Can you really be honest? Well, first off, you have to know I'm an optimist. I'm an optimistic person, and it's something we carry forward with our work quarterly. But it's also the fact that the numbers don't lie. There's power in print media. So first off, you have to understand 90% of all adults in America read magazines. And those magazines come in all different formats, special interests, hobbies, city regional, like what we do, covering a specific geographic territory, and many other kind of topics. It's also that people care. If you look at the statistics, neuroscience research has actually shown us that people who engage with a printed product, with paper in their hands, actually interact with their media on a different level. According to the News Media Alliance, research shows us that people who read on paper are more focused and they're less distracted. They have a higher comprehension and recall. They read more slowly. And also, each and every one of their senses is involved. They're touching it, they're feeling it, they're smelling it. They're not quite tasting it, but it's similar. They have a very different experience with it because it's very tactile in nature. And finally, and I think most importantly to remember, is that these readers are coming from every single age group. We're talking the youngest to the oldest, 18 to whatever. It's all age groups and across all different demographics. And plus, there's another aspect to it too because of that tactile. We all know that it's really easy for us to just forget about our emails or to ignore another website and move on. But it's a lot harder when you have a beautiful printed package that's sitting right in front of you, attracting you and calling you. We know that it's a lot easier to share that beautiful package as well. Imagine when you have a magazine in your hand, you can share it with your family, you can share it with your friends, with your household. In fact, research also shows us that on average, this magazine will be read by 4 people during its lifetime. So there's very much power in that printed media. It's also the fact that across America right now, you find that city regional magazines, things like Northwest Quarterly, or titles like Midwest Living or Chicago, you find that these magazines are thriving. And they're thriving precisely because they're engaging their audiences. And they're doing it with a beautiful printed product. Think about it, big pictures, lots of color. And best of all, there's ample space for long-form writing, long-form journalism. And it lends itself perfectly to investigative type of journalism. And of course, after our discussion tonight, we know that there's definitely a need in the world for that. Now, Northwest Quarterly, we have a very simple mission. If you look at the back of our business card, it tells you right away that we are publishers of relentlessly positive, uplifting, and informative magazines. First off, relentlessly positive in what we do. We carry an optimist's view forward. And of course, we love to celebrate the great qualities that our region has. We know that Rockford has great qualities. We also know that this region can and will continue to prosper. And we're right there cheering on every step of this community's advancement. And since Northwest Quarterly started in 2004, we shared a lot of successes with our readers. Think about things like downtown's renaissance, manufacturing's comeback, things like the airport. We've had new destinations to the Rockford area, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we can cover. We're also uplifting a community with the attitude and the voice that we carry. Well, every year we do a 25 most interesting people story. We highlight 25 people who are a true cross-section of this community, people who come from every walk of life, every corner of the region, and we celebrate the things they're doing every single day to uplift and improve our community. And of course, in every single issue that you read, you'll see that we're uplifting our community through things like celebrating small businesses, healthcare, local destinations, all sorts of things that make this community special and unique. And of course, if you look at the cover of every magazine, we love to celebrate the unique aesthetic and authentic value of our region, that great corner of the Midwest where we live. Of course, we're also informed readers as well. Our bread and butter, of course, is small business. These are the entrepreneurs who really drive this community. We educate readers. It's a major thing that we do, is educating readers on all sorts of ordinary things, especially from our small business community. These are things like home and garden tips, healthcare ideas, family fun, entertainment. We help to fill some of those niches. And in the end, we put out 6 issues a year, each one almost 260 pages thick. That's a lot of paper and a lot of issues. So these stories that we do, they may not always feel like journalism in that kind of classic sense, the Woodward and Bernstein kind of thing, but they do provide a valuable service to our community nonetheless. They're enhancing our locally owned businesses, and they're projecting a positive vision of the future. We are beating the drum of this community's advancement every single day through our work. Now, of course, advancement, that's a big word. And it's not just throwing on rosy glasses and having an optimistic, hopeful view of the future. It's not wishful thinking at all. What it means to us is asking tough questions and addressing challenges that we have head on. Because our platform in magazines is designed for long reads, long engagement, magazines are unique for doing things like investigative journalism. In fact, last year, Northwest Quarterly launched a series of articles where we explored crime in the Rockford area. Our first target, domestic violence, which actually in Rockford comprises nearly 40% of all of the city's violent crime. That's a lot. So what did we do? We asked policymakers difficult questions. We went to talk to people on the ground about the work that they're doing. And through it all, we shared how those ideas and those policies are shaping our community and improving it as well. Now, we were definitely optimistic. That's what we do. We were optimistic and we were hopeful. But we also got real. We made sure that we had data and research, in-depth interviews, fresh perspectives. All of those qualities that make quality journalism were an inherent part of what we did and how we did it. So when you put all of that together, uplifting, positive, informative, you can start to see why people love engaging with things like magazines. All across the region, or all across our country, you find magazines that offer a beautiful product, loyal readers, positive message to the community. It's a message that we know our neighbors desperately need to hear, but we also know they want to hear it. And furthermore, we know that advertisers want to be a part of that. They find that value within what we do. To me, it's very interesting. One of the interesting things I have with what I do, I'll go out and I'll meet people, introduce myself, and I'll say, oh, I work with Northwest Quarterly Magazine. Do you know the first thing they tell me? They say, I love your ads. I want you to think about that for a minute. I love your ads. When was the last time you heard somebody who got so excited about the advertising in a product? And yet we hear that on a regular basis. People recognize the work that we do because we put a lot of thought and a lot of value and a lot of emphasis on the work in Northwest Quarterly. Every ad, every piece of content, every design, even the covers that go into our magazine. We put as much as 2,000 to 3,000 man hours of work into each and every issue to make sure it is that beautiful package that you can't help but want to fall in love with. Now, think about this. I love your ads. If people are that invested and that concerned about the advertising in it, how much more must they also value the content that goes along with it? Remember, this is content that they find relevant, interesting, inspiring, uplifting, informing. Those are the kind of things that people want to hear. That's also something that we know connects people on a totally different level. So that's why in the end I say, I don't see how magazines, print media are really going anywhere. So thank you.
Well, I am overwhelmed with this extraordinary panel, and the professor here is saying, I need to take this on the road. But what an extraordinary opportunity. Catherine, do you have the mic there? And then do we have a mic down here? Oh, it's underneath. Okay. Hello? Turn it on. Hello? Okay. Sheila had a question. If you have a question, she'll bring you the mic, and then if you guys could just pass it down, whoever wants to take it.
Thank you all for your input. It was very informative. However, I think this meeting is an example of the lack of media coverage. If there had been more media coverage, this venue might have been too small. So where else was the broadcast?
Well, we do most of our advertising by email because our institute operates totally under the umbrella of Rockford University, and we depend upon people like Bergstrom and other people, Jim Keeling and his fellow attorneys, to help fund the different programs that we have. And the opportunity to have this program go into homes live streamed and saved, that's a whole group of people that are opting to watch the program. And you get us, give us your email and we'll pester you with future programs that come up.
Well, I found out through CLR, and judging from the audience here, I think a lot of others.
Yeah, this is the Center for Learning and Retirement
Yes.
at Rock Valley College, and we really appreciate the effort that you've done to turn out the people here.
I'll add that all of the co-hosts that are listed on the
Yes.
program, they are distributed via their emails as well. But I think you made a good point. Absolutely.
A question for Professor Mosley, talking about news deserts and news monopoly sites with one form of just printed information and sometimes other information seems to be focused on rural areas. And these, of course, tend to be Republican areas, and you talk about misinformation and disinformation increased in those areas. Is there some causal relationship between, shall we say, conservative or hyper-conservative viewpoints and this lack of information? Or is your comment, shall we say, something that is focused on what happens in Chicago?
Good question, and thank you for it. So I would say a couple of things. A lot of the news deserts, yes, are in rural areas. There's no question about it. Many of them in the middle of the country, the Plain States, and in the southeastern part of the United States. You can almost draw a straight line from Brownsville, Texas, up through the middle of the country, all the way up through the Dakotas to the Canadian border, and that's either a news desert or it's a one publication county. I will say, though, that many of the loss of newspapers recently have been in suburban areas. And we've also seen loss of publications in cities as well. Yeah. So just a couple weeks ago, as the congressman was mentioning, the Santa Barbara, California newspaper closed up shop, one of the wealthiest communities in the United States of America, home to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry and other Oprah and others live in that area, and it went out of business. So this can happen. It is happening everywhere, not just in rural areas. So I try to deal in data, not in partisanship. And it is true that there are many counties in the South and especially in the middle of the country that are primarily Republican areas. But this is a problem everywhere, and misinformation is a problem everywhere as well. And we've also seen the emergence. You guys heard of pink slime sites, pink slime local news? So pink slime is like that gooey stuff that used to come out of meat products that they would substitutes in some stores. So there are now 1,200 so-called pink slime local news sites around the country, primarily run by partisan organizations, sometimes by companies, and they're passing themselves off as legitimate news organizations. Some of them have print products like newspapers, their websites look like legitimate news sites, but in actuality, they're being run by ideological players. And so if you're a consumer, it's kind of hard to know the difference sometimes in what you're looking at. So, it's a problem everywhere. And it is true that it is primarily a rural issue at the moment. And that's what I lose a lot of sleep over, is what happens in these communities when they lose local news.
Thank you. The comments of all of the panelists were really interesting. But the topic is the gigantic impact of disappearing local news. Is there an alternative? Is there a solution to this impact?
That's why we formed the task force, right, to look at potential solutions. We don't, some states have mentioned passed legislation. Many others are considering it, or doing the same thing in Illinois. I mentioned tax incentives, for example, is one possible solution to incentivize people to read local news, to hire local reporters. We need to, as was mentioned, most of the advertising dollars are going to the big tech companies now. Is there a way to change the business model so how local news organizations can tap into that? It's a very difficult question. I'm not sure legislatively that's possible, but although advertising dollars are going to big tech companies, how do we, for those local organizations that are putting out the local content, which is a demand for, right? The big tech companies are distributing it, but not returning any of the dollars to local organizations. Do we find ways to fill the pipeline? So, as far as journalists, so I think we're really the past year or two are from a legislative perspective, political perspective, looking at potential solutions. I don't have an answer for you yet. I think it's going to be a combination of a number of things. I don't think it's going to be a silver bullet that says this is going to solve the local journalism problem. I think the nature of the problem is different in rural areas, maybe city areas, so the solution may be different. I don't think there's going to be one thing that's going to save local journalism. It has to be a comprehensive approach, very tailored to specific media markets and different mediums. So, and I think at the end of the day, people are very creative, right? We're seeing that right now. We have an organization called Capital News, Illinois, that covers local government. It's dependent upon nonprofits. There wasn't a lot of state reporting because newspapers were hiring off or laying off their state reporters, right? Because they were decreasing staff. Well, you have an organization now that's really been expanding the past few years, and they solely cover state news. And so you have a lot of local newspapers just tap into Capital News. So there are creative efforts to generate this local activity. And I'm optimistic. I still believe people want local news. As long as people want local news and there's demand for local news, people will find a way to get distributed. We just got to find the right business model. Not sure what it is yet.
I think there's a key component of that question is the answer will be determined over the next 10 years. It's going to come with innovation and entrepreneurship. And it's going to come with risk takers. Because last week, Canada insisted that Facebook pay publishers to distribute their content. Facebook immediately pulled all news sites. The Canadian broadcasters and American broadcasters have since they're up in arms. Not just Facebook. So as we get into legislative answers, we run the risk of that. Rock River Current has 1 million page views last year. We still get a ton of traffic from social media. We don't have everybody typing in rockrivercurrent.com. There's dangers to that, but it's going to require, if you go back, the first town crier wasn't government funded. He stood in the town square and shouted the news. And then the printing press came along, and somebody took a chance, Mr. McCormick, and started the Chicago Tribune. And that printed a lot of money over time, in addition to newspapers that funded things like WGN Radio and WGN TV, now Red Expert. And along the way, that profit led to innovation. So as we talk about different models, there's going to be some combination, but we have to remember it's okay to profit because profit allows reinvestment. That reinvestment allows innovation. That innovation leads to new ways to distribute news, create content, and fund the future that will help us all figure out how this model has to work. There is incredible appetite for news. And I also think the challenge in this room, we need people under 40 years old engaging in this. And how are they going to consume news and information? And how do they want it distributed to them? We can't figure it out without them. I watch my almost 15-year-old every night. They are on YouTube. They are on PlayStation. And their house is paid for by advertising. Bro, it's a challenge.
I might add to what Mike said too. You have to remember too that we in the media business are in a business, so you have to be able to make money. Can you hear me now? So it's a business, so you have to be able to make money doing what you do. So whatever the business models are that become successful, we have to be able to test those out, innovate them, etc., and they have to be able to make money off of what they do. In order to make money, you also have to have a value proposition. You have to be able to, wherever you get your revenue from, whether that's tutors, advertisers, or some combination of that, people find a value in what you do that they want to then buy into it.
You know, you mentioned your 14 and 15-year-old. I have the same college students, and they get everything through TikTok and their devices, right? They don't even know what newspaper is. I don't think so. But that, to your point, that's how they're getting the news information, and that is probably they're going to determine how that's distributed. Here's the other component I think is important, and we passed legislation a couple of years ago regarding media literacy. I think especially the younger generation needs to know where their news information has come from. What newspaper, what TV station. I think there's a lot of confusion, especially the younger generation. They don't know where that news is coming from. They get it from their device. They're getting it from TikTok, but what was the original source of that? And that, I think, is the crux of the problem. And we passed legislation to try to get that in the K-12 curriculum. Once people know where that news and information is coming from, this is going to be a huge, huge problem. And we've got to address that first because, again, if you don't know that information, how to judge it. And here's the thing, I think one of the points, politicians that weaponize misinformation and information that's factual because they know people don't know where that information is coming from. So they weaponize it to push a political agenda. That's where the misinformation is. So I think the second component, we need to do a better job making sure people know where that information is coming from.
Hi, this question is for Professor Franklin. How is this Sun-Times model working? Is it too early to tell, or have they gotten, is the public ownership?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So for those of you who don't know, in January of 2022, the Chicago Public Radio acquired the Chicago Sun-Times. They took on the debt from the previous owner. They raised $60 million from foundations to help support the organization. As I mentioned before, they've been hiring lots of journalists for both newsrooms, which is a very positive thing. And this has now been replicated in a couple of other markets. Texas, in the suburbs north of Dallas, public radio stations bought a local newspaper, combined newsrooms. In Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, public radios acquired a local newspaper, combined newsrooms. So it's a really interesting experiment. I think it's too early to declare it a success or not. I don't have eyes on the financials of the deal to see how financially how it's going. But from a journalistic perspective, I think it's been successful. And I also think that public radio, do we have public radio listeners? Most of you? Okay. I think public radio can play a role. I don't think there is one business model. I think there can be many business models. And 92% of all local news organizations are for-profit commercial news organizations. So there is going to have to be innovation. But I do think public radio could be part of the solution in many communities. They have a brand in that community. They're known, they're trusted. Unfortunately, very few of them have journalists. A lot of them are playing jazz during the day. But there could be a way to get public radio more involved in local news problem that we currently have.
I've got a couple of questions and stories. One, I went to a similar to this in Chicago about 6 months ago. And you guys remember Tommy Edwards on WLS? He was one of the panelists. And somebody asked, where's radio going to be in the next 50 years? And Tommy was the one that came up with something that has really stuck with me. He says it's going to be content driven. And he used this as an example. He said, if you have a favorite pizza place that is 4 blocks from your house and has been there for 50 years, and they opened up another one on the other side, and they opened up somebody down by the airport, they've got other locations because they've been successful. What happens when that pizza place by your house closes? You stop eating pizza? You stop eating their pizza? Do you travel wherever that content is? Maybe not as frequently, but do you go there for that content? That's what he was saying about the popularity of different formats of radio, which obviously they've ebbed and flowed over the years, uh, podcasts and blogs and other obviously to be able to get that content out there, and it sort of stuck with me. The second thing is, um, it's a story I've told or a lot of times in the last month because my son graduated from Ball State University with videography, and he had the chance to be able to go into an advertising agency, go to a film production company, and he wanted to go into news. He's 22 years old at the time. And he goes, I want to go into news. I like the urgency of it. I like what you're able to pull and be able to share through the television. He was the cameraman for Aaron Wilson on TV 23 for about a year and a half. Okay, so it's to that point we've always been there, all of us have been there, where they're drawn from somewhere else, and the reason for drawing them out there. Because I love the company and I love the people I work with, and I've got a girlfriend from for 7 months now. Am I stupid? What am I doing? Why am I giving all this up to go to the Rockies? And I go, well, if you're going to do it, it's going to be when you're 24 years old. Keep it up. You're going from media market 138 to media market 16. I do. I do. That's why I said question in the beginning. So he went out there and knocked on doors. And when he got the interview, the guy said immediately, he goes, I should not bring you this interview. And he goes, why? He says, we just talked 2 days ago. You wanted to meet. He says, well, because you only have 5 years experience and we're Denver, Colorado. You've got a year and a half experience. You're in the Eagle Scout. I also see you're from Rockford, Illinois. And he goes, well, I get the Eagle Scout thing. So, okay. So the question is, without giving the punchline away, the question is, where is your sources for those training grounds, which is what you're doing at Rock Valley College, and are they traditional sources for hiring people, whether it be you've got the degree or you've got the passion, any of
I probably spend more time on recruitment than I should. It's changed. We have one hire and one pending, depending if I okay it, from North Central College. I mentioned Chelsea and from Eric. I literally met Chelsea at Anderson Dodge. She was behind the bar at a catering event. She said, I want to be in media. And I'm like, I'm a 4-star at church. I was like, let's go. And so the game has changed. I won't speak for her, but when I got the bug in a media class at the University of Wisconsin, you couldn't hold me back from the radio station. I called the next day and I had an internship a week later. And that wasn't because I loved radio. I loved media, but I answered the phone and then I showed up. And then eventually I got the Wisconsin State Journal also, and I picked radio over print. But those grounds are changing. We also see it in our sales reps. Newsflash, nobody under the age of 30 wants to sell anything. If you have children or grandchildren that want to make a lot of money and are okay working like provide customer service, to look at a job because they will have a great career, drive a nice car, and have a big house. So the recruitment world is changing immensely. And any of the models we had from the 70s and 80s and 90s have to be blown up because there's talents in everybody. They might not come from traditional universities. You might find them waiting tables at Lino's. And if you can transition and transfer those skills to other areas, it's going to be there. we're also horrible at PR about our own industry. I'm sure that I am a whole example. My brow is furrowed because I'm dealing with it. I don't make my job fun. And people that want to aspire to be a general manager, do that. I don't want to do that. Versus when I grew up, you aspired to be in the corner office and have the fancy business card and go to lunch, University Club or Rockford Club, pick your place here. Now people are like, screw that. So it's changed immensely. There's no magic answer for that, but managers that aren't recruiting will fail. So if I work with our managers, I'm like, you must recruit every.
I can't add much about the, and I'm not sure you mean like where I don't do the hiring. I do look at every once in a while when someone wants to get there. Traditionally, if someone wants to get into television, they have a demo reel. So you look at some of the work they've already done, whether it's in college. Most of the people that we hire are traditionally through some sort of college program. At one point at the station, we had 4 of my former students all working at the same time. I went down to 3 and I went back to 4. I think we're now 3 right now. And I'm just going to throw out a plug for the traditional path through Rock Valley College's program. It's great. A lot of people know that it exists. It trains a lot of these students. Jerry Levi does a great job with that program, training them to, and it's much more production focused, I would say. We hire, most of the people that we've hired, I don't think we've hired any reporters that were in the program where I was teaching, but we've hired a lot of production people and people who are doing camera work for us. So one of our photographers who was at the county fair with us doing live shots today, she was my student last semester. And so one of the things with Rock Valley too is it's 2 years. So, we are hiring more people with that 2 years experience as opposed to waiting for someone to go. I know our news director, Coventry, she has gone to different events, fairs, hiring events. She's been to, I don't know where else, she's been to a couple of events where they'll set up a table and talk to students about potential jobs. And some of it is eye-opening. Again, just what I briefly mentioned about how to write. They come out of high school, how to write. You have to kind of teach them some of those things. So that's where I think sometimes a 4-year program is advantageous for someone who wants to do more of that writing. That professional is not the right word, but there's a different skill set to the writing as there is to the being able to be creative and shoot something with the camera. Sometimes that's all it takes, just a couple of years. I just remember when I was in college, ancient times, the broadcast program, we all hung out at the station. Like that's what we did. As part of the theater program too. So we did. I was split my time between those worlds. But Rock Valley is the same way when it comes to the students. The students who are really successful in that program are the ones who. And again, Jerry does a great job, and we keep in touch with him as well to try and have some sort of a where that's how we hired Joy, our last photographer. We had someone who left quickly. She had just graduated. I knew her plan was only to get the 2-year certificate, and she was available season town. And I was at a charity event with her parents, and we started talking about it. And so that was kind of how I knew what her interests were. So that's certainly a non-traditional way to find somebody. We haven't found anybody behind the bar. Chelsea's a rare find. I joked around though. I mean, Mike said taught her the class that she taught because she was already working for you at the time. She just wanted to finish her certificate. But yeah, I think we still find most of our hires through traditional routes. But again, my students, they don't watch TV, they don't listen to the radio. I'm not the only person who said that. It's just a matter of taking that content and setting them someplace else to get that content. But I also, and this is just a personal thing, is that traditionally when you look at numbers, I haven't seen anything recently, but younger people aren't all that interested in news. And I still remember being in my 20s, like I wasn't super interested in the news, even in college. I was in college during the first Iraq War, so that was kind of like my first. I remember certain moments, right? I remember that. I remember when the radio was shot, and that kind of got me interested. I'm dating myself now. I remember when the Russians shot down the Korean airline. Was that flight 007, I think, or
some reason that sticks in my head. Maybe we all remember that incident. Those are little things. I remember sitting there, and it goes to the passion aspect of it. I remember sitting for no other reason other than I was kind of nerdy about it, and I was an aviation geek. I took notes about it, and I watched the news conference. I'd never done anything, and then I forgot about it. Like that was my only interest in news. So one thing that I struggle with internally is that we learned that, and when it comes to news talk, music and entertainment is a tad different. But when it comes to news content, we have conversations of, well, young people, even now, us old people are the ones on Facebook. The young people aren't. My daughter doesn't go to. The only reason my daughter goes to Facebook is because when she's in a show at Starlight Theater, that's how they communicate with the cast. It's easy. But other than that, she's TikTok, Snapchat. She's never on Twitter. But so then you think, okay, well, the young people, she's 21. That generation, well, that's where they're at. So it's really, but she could care less about what's going on. And so then I have in this internal dilemma of how much do we need to change our delivery? Because we're going after this younger demographic not really interested in news anyway. I think at some point we certainly have to adapt, but I don't think we need to put all of our focus on trying to get early 20-somethings into news consumption, in news consumption. Kind of goes to the whole argument of advertising that one of the only things I ever remember from a marketing or advertising class in college is that when you get hooked on a brand early in their consumer careers or lives, they will stick with that brand sometime unless something dramatically derails them from that brand. And so I guess you can make that argument too. I'm not smart enough to know statistics to it. But that's another thing internally that I always struggle with is that we're chasing this younger generation who is TikTok fed and sometimes Snapchat fed, certainly YouTube fed. Do we put too much of our news resources towards that content delivery method as opposed to interested in news consumption? I don't think the answer.
To wrap up, Mike, did you have something that you wanted to add to that? Okay, I'm sorry that I know that.
I just need to
Go ahead.
I just need to ask media literacy before get that into high school because that's an aspect of education in our society that will help to save the lives.
That could take we'll all agree with you, but I don't think.
How are we going to get that in high school?
Yeah, and I don't know, since I had the mic, I don't have an answer to that, but I just remember when I was that age, I didn't care. So I know how to do that in schools at that age.
How you define it, how it's taught, I think it's pretty flexible, but there should be some media literacy in the curriculum.
I'd like to talk to you more.
Yeah.
Okay, we ran a half an hour longer than normal, but I just ended. I'm sorry. We want to thank our what an extraordinary group of people talking about subjects that are just way beyond us. I'm a 3x5 card. People don't use those. They use different types of media, but I thank all of you for the additions that you did to the information. And interesting if we could repeat this now and see what's going on. Thank you all for coming very, very much. Catherine, could you get a picture?